Dark Voices from Within. Chapter 1. Katie switched off her microphone and leaned back, exhausted. Her true crime podcast, Dark Days, had finally wrapped its 6-part deep dive into the gruesome murders committed by the infamous serial killer, Paul Stanton. Katie shuddered just thinking about the horrific details she had covered. Over his 15-year reign of terror throughout California, Stanton had killed at least 20 women that the police knew of. Probably more, Katie suspected. His victim profile never varied, always women in their early 20s with long brunette hair. Katie herself fit that description perfectly. Katie took some small comfort in knowing that the monster was safely behind bars now, had been for the last 5 years actually, ever since they finally hunted him down and convicted him. The overpowering evidence ensured he'd never see freedom again. Leaning forward to her laptop, Katie pulled up a photo of Stanton. His dark, dead eyes still haunted her. She had interviewed so many cold-blooded killers over the years, but something about Stanton truly gave her chills. Maybe it was the perverse joy he seemed to take in taunting authorities and the families of his victims. Even with the death penalty suspended in California indefinitely, life imprisonment seemed too mild a punishment. As Katie gathered her papers from the latest recording session, her producer, Raj, knocked and entered, holding a small pile of mail. "Great session today, Katie, so creepy my skin is still crawling. Here's today's listener mail. Mostly all positive feedback on our Stanton episodes it looks like. After all that research, they better appreciate it," Katie said. Raj left and Katie flipped through the letters and cards. She paused curiously at a plain white envelope simply addressed, "Katie," in very uneven handwriting. She slid it open and pulled out a single piece of notebook paper. The message was typed in all caps. "Katie, enjoyed catching up on our story. You tell it well. But not all of it. Miss some of the good parts, don't you? Don't worry, I can fill in the gaps. We'll be in touch. XO, Paul." Katie leapt up, spilling the rest of the mail across the floor. She stared again at those ominous words, "Our story." Paul. It wasn't possible. Some cruel hoax for sure. Her hands shook, making the paper rattle. Raj appeared in the doorway again looking concerned. "Katie, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Katie wordlessly handed him the letter. Raj scanned it quickly. "Whoa, creepy stuff. Can't be real though, right?" Katie could hear the doubt creeping into Raj's voice as the implication set in. No, definitely not. It's just some warped fan playing a dumb trick clearly," Katie said, trying to convince herself. She took the letter back from Raj and stared intensely at it. Should we tell someone at least? File a report?" Raj asked uneasily. A long pause, then Katie answered firmly, "No. Then they'd win, whoever this loser is. Trying to intimidate me. I just did 20 shows on California's worst psycho killer. No way one silly note rattles me." Her voice betrayed less confidence than her words. Raj eyed her warily. "Well, okay, you're the boss, Katie. It really is probably nothing." He didn't look quite convinced though. "I'll let you get home, unless you want me to stay a while." No, all good. Tired is all, see you tomorrow." Katie avoided eye contact until Raj had finally gathered his things and left. At last alone, Katie tried to settle her breathing from short gasps back to normal. She slowly sat back down, her pulse still racing as she reread the message from Paul. She had to get home and inspect her security system, make sure everything was armed up tight. As she reached for her jacket, her eyes fell on Stanton's photo again, his demonic eyes boring into her. A quote from one of his survivors being interviewed suddenly echoed in her mind. I don't think people quite realize what we're dealing with in Paul Stanton. It's almost something more than human. A chill went down Katie's spine. Something more than human indeed. She swept the rambling quote from her thoughts. That's absurd, of course. He was just a man, caged and rotting forever in maximum security isolation. Katie slammed her laptop shut hard, as if closing the lid on Stanton himself. She snatched up her bag and keys and rushed from the office, glancing over her shoulder as she went. Chapter 2. Katie stirred her coffee absently, staring off into space. She hadn't gotten much sleep, her dreams filled with visions of demonic eyes gazing out at her from darkened prison cells. Never had a story, or a simple fan letter, gotten so far under skin before. There had been no further strange messages since that first note nearly a week ago. The knot in Katie's stomach had finally begun to loosen when Raj had entered the studio that morning clutching another white envelope simply labeled Katie. Heart pounding, Katie had opened the envelope with trembling hands under Raj's concerned gaze. This message was typed in the same erratic style. Katie, thanks for telling my story so very well. But you seem to have forgotten dear departed Alice after we had so much fun those nights by the lake. I still think of her fondly. But no bother, I'm always happy to remind you of what you've forgotten. More soon. XO, Paul. Katie shuddered violently at the memory. Alice. Victim number 17, the police had dubbed her when her body was found mutilated in the reeds near Lake Sonoma 5 years ago. Only the killer could possibly know details of those nights by the lake. Raj had pleaded with Katie again to go to the police this time, but Katie found herself oddly paralyzed by both fear and curiosity over who could be sending these beyond disturbing messages. Some hacker that had accessed privileged case files. She doubted even that explained such intimate knowledge of the kills. Alice. Katie muttered aloud. Raj looked up from his work, his forehead lined with worry whenever Stanton was brought up now. Sorry Raj, just talking to myself, don't mean to spook you too, Katie said with an apologetic smile. No spooking for sure, but maybe cool it on speaking that creep's name aloud, huh? Raj said. Katie gave a hollow laugh. As Katie gathered her research notes, her phone vibrated loudly on the table before blaring out an emergency broadcast tone. Heart seizing, she looked at the alert message in dread. Oh God, they've found another body, Katie whispered. Raj leaned in to read the breaking news alert and the color drained from his face. The butchered body of a young brunette woman had been discovered along the banks of the Russian River, only miles from where Alice's remains had been found by Lake Sonoma years ago. No ID on the victim yet. But it perfectly matched Stanton's victim profile. And his gruesome methods. It can't be. Katie gasped. There's no way. Raj stared back wordlessly. Hands fumbling with panic, Katie pulled up the California State Prison website on her laptop, clicking frantically through records on Stanton's inmate status. Still confined, round-the-clock guards, no visitors, Katie muttered rapidly. She sat back heavily, fighting a rising tidal wave of confusion and fear. Raj found his voice again. Katie, talk to me. Could these newest messages and now this killing be connected somehow? But Stanton can't be free, right? No way he. No. No. He's under permanent 23-hour lockdown, Katie cut him off abruptly. The cops will sort this new case out. It's just some copycat psycho, clearly. She turned away so Raj couldn't read the uncertainty no doubt visible in her alarmed eyes. Katie fought desperately to control her shaking hands. Surely Stanton, monster that he was, now rotted safely away from the world and any more innocent victims. Surely. The emergency tone blared loudly again from Katie's phone, causing her to flinch violently once more. She grabbed for it with dread gripping her insides. Another alert message flashed. The mutilated body just discovered has been identified as Heather Dennings, age 23. Last seen 3 nights ago near Lake Sonoma. Katie gasped and covered her mouth at the name, renders utterly speechless. Raj stared at her helplessly. "Katie, what is it?" he pleaded. "That name," Katie whispered with frightened eyes. "I know that name, Raj. She had written me last month. Said she was fascinated by my Stanton episodes, and that she herself had grown up out there by the lakes where he found so many victims." Raja's mouth hung open mutely in horror. Katie leaped up now in a panic from her chair. I need some air," she sputtered, grabbing her bag and hurrying out the studio door into the hallway. She rushed into an empty office and closed the door, leaning heavily back against it for support. Heart pounding fiercely in her ears, Katie couldn't escape the feeling she was being pulled into a sadistic puppet show, orchestrated by some unseen hand tugging diabolically at the strings. Stanton himself seemed to be mockingly leading her toward conclusions too impossible, and too terrifying, to possibly consider. Chapter 3. Katie paced the studio floor rapidly, chewing on a nail feverishly. Raj watched her orbit him for the dozenth time before finally stepping in her path. "Katie, stop. You're wearing a groove in the floor. Please just take a breath," Raj urged, grasping her shoulders gently. Katie paused her frantic motion but couldn't meet his eyes. It had been 2 weeks since Heather Dennings' murdered body was found brutalized near Lake Sonoma. 2 agonizing weeks waiting on tenterhooks for another chilling message linked to Stanton. And none had come after that last note dropped the name that not even police had released yet at that point. Katie had combed every inch of her apartment for listening devices, changed email passwords multiple times. But no more messages came, a silence almost more frightening than additional contact. "No news is good news," Raj offered hopefully. Katie shook her head bitterly. "There was never going to be any good here, Raj. Either a deranged hacker toying with me for fun, or..." Katie trailed off, the unspoken alternative too terrible to voice aloud. "Hey, we locked down all security," Raj said firmly. "No way anyone is spying on your work anymore. This whack job clearly wanted to just stir you up over Stanton. Getting into your head, Katie." Katie nodded blankly. She hadn't gotten a full night's sleep in weeks, the brief snatches filled with ghoulish dreams of the women Stanton had savaged flickering before her eyes. She collapsed into her desk chair, emotionally and physically spent. Just then Katie's phone vibrated to life, the tone reviving the dread that pooled in her stomach whenever unknown contacts reached out. She grabbed at it hastily, maybe a much-needed clue waited on the other end of this call. "Katie dear. Darling, finally getting back to me, I see," oozed the unmistakably melodic tones of Vivian Vaughn Vickers, Katie's infamously flamboyant agent well known in podcaster circles. Katie sighed deeply. She adored Vivian but just hadn't had it in her for social calls of late. Bracing herself, she answered politely, "Vivian, so lovely to hear your voice. My apologies for being scarce, chasing down leads on the Stanton story has utterly consumed me." Katie hoped desperately Vivian couldn't detect the strain in her voice. "Still dwelling on that dreadful business, Katie? God knows the grisly tale deserves your golden touch, darling. But don't let the darkness swallow you whole," Vivian exclaimed. "No, I'm actually phoning with remarkable news, my pet. There's buzz building in Los Angeles of bringing dark days to television. People are so enraptured with your podcast, Katie, imagining those shocking true tales brought to life on screen. What do you say?" Despite her turmoil, Katie felt a flicker of excitement at the idea. A TV version of her podcast exposing real monsters to even more of the world. Still though, the mounting horrors around Stanton's resurgence haunted Katie's reality for now. As Katie pondered mutely how to respond, Vivian chattered on enthusiastically about production companies and streaming giants hungry for Katie's next move. But amidst the chatter, one phrase jolted Katie fully back from her thoughtful haze. Even Paul Stanton's devastated survivors are captivated. Why Alice's very own sister called me directly saying she. Wait, Vivian, what did you just say? Katie sputtered out. Alarm spread across Raj's face as he listened in. Why Alice's sister, of course. Remarkable woman who has turned such grief into good works helping other victims' families. Vivian replied matter-of-factly. That's impossible. Katie whispered fervently. Alice was a foster kid bounced through the system her whole life. She never even knew her real parents according to all records. An uneasy silence hung palpably. When Vivian finally responded, all theatricality had drained from her tone. What on earth are you talking about, Katie? The woman who called was very much Alice's sister. She sent me photos of them together as girls. She was devastated but so very proud of your efforts bringing light to Alice's case. Katie's phone creaked under the pressure of her clenching fingers. Vivian kept talking distantly but Katie was no longer listening. Finally she uttered quietly into the phone, Vivian, I need to call you back. Stabbing at the disconnect button, Katie turned frightened eyes up to meet Raj's equally unsettled gaze. Raj, we need to get to the bottom of Stanton's outside contacts immediately. Someone has dug into aspects of his case they absolutely should not have access to. This has gone way too far. Chapter 4. Katie sat rigidly on the sparse couch in private investigator Daniel Gray's sterile downtown office. She squeezed a worn manila file folder tightly on her lap as Daniel clicked through screens on his computer. Raj sat supportively next to Katie, giving her a gentle nudge. Try and breathe, Katie. We're finally getting somewhere chasing down this thing, he offered. Katie nodded tensely. They had gone straight to the police with Vivian's revelation about the mysterious sister of victim Alice, but came away frustrated. With no actual threats or proof of a crime, the best the detectives could offer was to flag them if anyone suspicious attempted to contact Stanton behind bars. It wasn't enough for Katie. Daniel swung his monitor around to face Katie and Raj. Alright, so Paul Stanton has been under 23-hour isolation and strict, hourly monitoring since the day he entered the maximum security wing 5 years back, Daniel summarized. His eyes narrowed. 0 approved visitors on record beyond one attorney appeal that went nowhere years ago. No phone call access either. Daniel tapped a few more keys then glanced back up, his expression perplexed. There was however a sealed incident report filed by the warden 2 months ago regarding an unauthorized letter sent to Stanton. But no details on the report contents or who was responsible. It was mysteriously classified right away. Katie leaned forward intently, the first concrete lead sending a jet of renewed urgency through her. So someone did reach Stanton from outside. There must be a crooked guard or lawyer on the take. Can we get access to this incident report? Katie pleaded. Daniel held up a calming hand. It's possible. But the log indicates whatever this letter contained, Stanton himself turned it over to the guards untouched. So unlikely any plotting happened there. Katie sat back, frustration rising. Another bizarre dead end. Her fingers tapped the sealed case file in her lap impatiently. There might be another way we can work around the prison stonewalling and dig deeper into Stanton's capabilities behind bars and connections beyond them, she muttered. Raj and Daniel both turned towards Katie with interest as she went on. Stanton was notorious for keeping grim souvenirs of his kills, jewelry, ID cards, even remains, Katie said haltingly. I thought re-examining what evidence was gathered might shine fresh light. See what precise mementos made him salivate and why. Katie gingerly opened the folder. Crime scene photos and evidence logs spilled out. Raj looked away quickly. Katie focused on the image of a worn boarding pass with strained intensity. Alice's boarding pass from the trip she took just before her death, Katie recalled. She traveled a lot when she could, desperate to outrun a traumatic childhood. Katie shuffled through more photos rapidly, a golden heart necklace encrusted in blood-red gems, a tattered, handwritten diary rescued from the bedside of victim number 5. Daniel cleared his throat loudly. "Sorry Ms. Bell, but keep in mind I just ate lunch here," he said with an uneasy chuckle. But Katie was fixated on the growing collage of Stanton's trophies. Finally she shook her head bitterly. Nothing. No trends or connections between victims' prized keepsakes that might indicate outside aid. She swept the gruesome spread away in defeat. Raj exhaled in relief and Daniel straightened his notes, eager to move the discussion elsewhere. "Okay, hitting walls on prison access and physical evidence," Daniel said brightly, clearly aiming to raise morale. "We'll need to explore other creative angles, grill old investigators familiar with Stanton maybe. Plenty more paths we can." Daniel halted abruptly. Katie and Raj turned to see him staring open-mouthed at his computer screen again. Alarmed, Katie followed Daniel's gaze to a live video feed of what appeared to be a breaking news alert. She read the red banner crawling along the bottom. "Another young brunette woman stalked and killed weeks after the Russian River murder. Found off Highway 29 near Lake Berryessa yesterday." Katie grabbed the desk edge for support, her worst fears crashing violently down around her. "No. It's happening again, Raj," she stammered. Raj clasped his hand over his mouth in horror. Daniel remained fixated on the report now flashing crime scene footage outside familiar winding lake roads. Katie saw herself falling into a pit of madness and despair, cruelly mocked by the ghost of Stanton from whatever void he surely could not have escaped from. Almost involuntarily, her hand clutched again at the weathered boarding pass peeking from the evidence file at her feet, Alice's bright dreams of freedom and promise stopping short at the hands of unthinkable evil over unseen dark lakes. Chapter 5. Katie sat curled on her couch, laptop balanced on knees, scanning news sites feverishly for updates on the latest murder by the lakes. She compulsively clicked refresh every few seconds, desperate for any shred of insight into the ongoing horror show she found herself helplessly caught in. Photos of the newest victim, Melanie Wells, 23, appeared on Katie's screen. Melanie smiled brightly from some happy, untroubled moment in her truncated life. Tragically, she fit the victim type perfectly with flowing brown hair and a longing for adventure. Probably drawn out west to spend warmer days frolicking untethered and carefree near the tranquil lakes she ultimately met her end by. Katie winced through tears at her computer. She couldn't halt the relentless cascade of details around the murders from searing into her mind, helped now by an unlikely, and utterly terrifying, narrator seeming to guide her from the beyond. Katie's phone vibrated to life loudly on her coffee table as if on sinister cue. She glanced warily at the blocked caller ID, then muted the ringer to let it go to voicemail. Likely another reporter seeking comment on potential connections between Melanie Wells, the previous Russian River slaying, and Stanton. As Katie reviewed more news reports in vain for fresh clues, yesterday's visit back out to San Quentin prison kept replaying through her mind. Raj had begged Katie not to go, certain speaking directly Stanton again after all this chaos would only lead to more trauma or danger. But Katie insisted whatever malevolent force seemed to have attached itself to her deserved answers she could only get face to face with the monster himself. Getting through security to reach maximum lockdown had been even more grueling than Katie's past visits over her years covering Stanton. Guards now seemed reluctant to even speak his name after the recent murder echoes, shuffling Katie through endless checkpoints until she sat at last across the steel table from the smiling psychopath himself. As expected, Stanton was unnervingly delighted by his apparent resurrection dominating headlines again. But Katie scrutinized his wandering, glassy eyes closely for signs of deception about any plot being orchestrated on the outside. When she directly accused Stanton of weaponizing someone else to continue his carnage from behind bars, that awful grin had only stretched wider. "Now where's the fun for me in that, Katie girl?" he had purred with a deranged chuckle. "If you're not getting your hands real dirty, then it's just not the same." His cackling still rang in Katie's ears now. His responses yielded little clarity, yet she had departed the prison feeling like unseen chess pieces continued to be ominously arranged against her. The sudden violent buzz of her silenced phone made Katie nearly leap off the couch. The menacing blocked caller ID flashed again. Katie hesitated just a moment before swiping to answer, pulse racing. Only eerie silence greeted her on the line. Bracing herself, Katie spoke firmly into the void, "I don't know who this is, but the police can trace this number. Identify yourself now." More unsettling quiet followed. Then slowly a familiar voice oozed from the receiver, "Katie girl. Don't you recognize my voice?" Then again always did, like our private visits with no pesky cops listening in. Katie's chest tightened in fear. "Stanton? How are you calling me from prison?" Sinister laughter echoed through the phone. "What can I say? You caught my attention. Had to make sure such a fine gal as yourself receives VIP treatment. Tell me, did ya like my latest work?" Katie clenched her fist, repulsed yet desperate for a confession. "Your work? Near Lake Berryessa, you mean? But witnesses put you in prison," Katie said shakily. "Oh Katie, enough games. You know there's more than one monster lurking these parts," Stanton sneered. "What do you mean? Stanton, stop talking in riddles if you're orchestrating these murders," Katie yelled in frustration. "Quiet static then, you always were, perceptive Ms. Bell. Sharp as my favorite knife. But let's move past pretenses, shall we? Consider this a cordial invitation to see the real show." Suddenly the call went dead. Katie stared helplessly into space, more lost than ever. The room felt icy cold now, tendrils of dark terror wrapping tighter. Before her mind could even process Stanton's threats, her laptop chimed loudly with a new email notification. Katie peered closer warily. The subject line simply read, "You're invited." Katie's cursor shook slightly as she clicked to open the message. Inside was a lone attachment, a graphic crime scene photo of Melanie Wells' savaged body twisted grotesquely along the lakeshore. Katie recoiled but couldn't tear her eyes away from the gruesome image. Then she glimpsed it, a shadowy shape hovering indistinctly in the background foliage behind Melanie's remains. Katie enhanced the image feverishly until the form resolved into a nightmarish, familiar visage, the lifeless eyes and soulless grin of Stanton himself leering out from the darkness. Katie shoved back violently from her computer, the sick manipulation crystallizing at last. Stanton remained locked away, but someone or something carried out murder in his name. The wheels had long ago left the tracks, yet Katie now rode this demonic roller coaster, unable to stop the plummet into unfathomable darkness dead ahead. Chapter 6. Katie's hands shook, making her car keys jangle as she unlocked her Prius parked down the block. She glanced around the quiet street uneasily. After the chilling photo sent to her phone, she felt unseen eyes tracking her everywhere. Katie slid into her car, double-checking the locks. The photo of Stanton's ghoulish face leering from the woods behind Melanie Wells' butchered body kept flashing through Katie's mind during her restless night. Someone had digitally inserted the image, she assumed, in a brazen effort to further toy with her. Katie sped towards Daniel Gray's office, eager for any progress researching Stanton's sprawling records that might identify who was taunting her so sadistically. Halfway there her phone buzzed loudly. Katie checked the screen warily, blocked caller ID again. She hesitated just a moment before answering. "All right, I'm done with your games, Katie said harshly. Tell me who you are and how you hacked sealed police photos and files. Now. Eerie silence on the line before the familiar mocking voice responded, hacked files. Don't be silly, Katie, my sweet. I was there in the flesh just as you saw. Taking in my handiwork, relishing it. Katie's chest constricted at Stanton's words oozing through the phone. No. There's no way, that's impossible. Katie stammered. Explain yourself or we're done here. TSK, that fiery tone again, Stanton chuckled. I always did admire your spunk, Katie. Tell you what, why don't we discuss this face-to-face again soon since you clearly need more convincing. I'll be in touch about our next prison visit. Don't keep me waiting too long. The line went dead again before Katie could respond. She careened hazardously between frustrated cars towards Daniel's office, the implications of Stanton's offer filling her with dread. Daniel leapt up when Katie rushed in looking deeply shaken. She frantically explained the newest communication from Stanton and the bizarre manipulated photo sent. Daniel studied the unnerving image carefully as Katie paced. This is spiraling fast, Daniel said. We need help from pros who specialize in cyber tracking and forensic photography analysis to dig deeper here. Daniel grabbed his jacket while updating Katie on threads pulled from old Stanton files. I have a tech crimes contact we should meet immediately. These escalating threats definitely constitute actionable evidence. We'll get cops fully involved finally. Katie hurried after Daniel out his office door but froze mid-step when her phone sounded yet again. She stared in confusion at the unfamiliar local number lighting up. Heart thudding, she answered cautiously. Katie Bell, a female voice responded. So very glad I caught you. Please don't hang up, this is critical. Who is this? Katie asked sharply. How did you get my private cell number? My name is Erica Hillman with the California Innocence Initiative based in Oakland. Your number came through our most urgent outreach files flagged for an immediate miscarriage of justice. Please, you must listen, I have critical information about Paul Stanton. Katie stood stunned, Daniel watching her intently. How could you possibly have any new evidence impacting Stanton's case? Katie finally sputtered out. And why are you calling me first? Erica replied earnestly, our organization utilizes advanced investigative techniques including genetic genealogy to free the wrongly convicted. We just uncovered startling DNA and eyewitness revelations proving Stanton did not commit 3 recent murders tied to him through press reports. Katie steadied herself against the door, legs rubbery. Wait, what eyewitness testimony? Katie managed to ask breathlessly. Silent anticipation hung palpably from both Erica and Daniel. Finally Erica responded, the testimony originated from Heather Deming's sister who came to us 2 days ago. She revealed Heather had whispered to her urgently just before her disappearance that she was meeting an unknown figure reaching out with intimate knowledge of Stanton's killings. And vowing they'd pick up where Stanton left off. Absolute silence descended from Katie's end. Erica pressed on insistently. Ms. Bell, none of the DNA from recent victims matches Stanton. He also has ironclad alibis for 2 of the 3 murders in prison visitor logs and security footage. Someone else killed those girls framing Stanton. Please, you have a platform, help us share the truth before the killer strikes again pretending to be. A loud click cut Erica off abruptly. Katie had ended the call, staring straight ahead in hollow shock. Someone copied Stanton's methods. Someone dug into his decade of depraved memories. Someone donning his ghoulish mask to smoothly pick up the killer's gruesome legacy right where he left off, rotting in a cell. Katie turned slowly to face Daniel, who stood mute, grim understanding etched on his features. There was only ever one monster who belonged behind bars, Katie realized. and the other roamed free, now beckoning her towards the heart of darkness dead ahead. Chapter 7. Katie sat hunched over the same scarred table in the frigid cement block interview room deep in the belly of San Quentin prison. The oppressive walls felt like they were closing in on her now, though she had met with countless convicts here over her true crime career. But none quite like the smiling demon across from her now, Paul Stanton, casually picking at his jagged fingernails with sadistic nonchalance as Katie detailed the revelations exonerating him from the recent string of murders. Stanton chuckled softly without looking up from his nails. An imposter out there committing such creative work in my name, eh? Have to admit that's a new one, Katie. Quite the unexpected twist. He finally raised his dead eyes to meet hers, his ever-present rictus grin spreading wider. Katie fought back a shudder. Unexpected for you, maybe. Stanton continued, but I did try and warn you, other beasts roam these parts. You just didn't want to listen. He attempted an exaggerated pout, but his smiling mask refused to crack. Katie steadied her voice, glaring back. I think you know exactly who is orchestrating these copycat killings. Was it a partner from your past? Some sick prison pen pal you managed to slip coded messages to? Stanton sighed loudly, glancing around the room with exaggerated drama. My Katie, slippery slope playing detective without a badge. Might lead you wandering into danger if you aren't careful. His grin somehow stretched wider as he emphasized the last word. Katie refused to indulge his taunts further. She pulled a slim folder from her bag instead, removing a weathered evidence photo of Alice, Stanton's 17th victim. Katie spun the photo showing Alice's smiling face toward Stanton. Since you claim no knowledge of current events, maybe you can help shed light on loose ends from your past then, Katie challenged. She tapped Alice's picture sharply. Like how Alice supposedly now has a long-lost sister very emotionally invested in her case. A sister feeding my agent intimate details about Alice. But records show Alice bounced through foster homes alone her whole childhood. Stanton glanced lazily down at the photo, indifferent. But his left eye ticked almost imperceptibly, Katie noticed. Can't say I recall all their silly sob stories once the fun started. Stanton leaned slowly forward, black eyes glittering. Once the toy broke. But hey, family pops out the woodwork whenever fame or money appear. Even in death seems poor Alice finally matters to someone. He cackled loudly while Katie forced stoic silence, processing his non-reaction. This avenging sister clearly traced directly to the current murder spree. Another phantom Katie realized she'd likely soon be confronting herself. Stanton composed himself, but delight still danced behind his eyes. I'm hurt, Katie. Still chasing ghosts from my past when the big bad boogeyman walking free as a bird seems the far juicier tale. TSK. Stanton playfully scolded. Katie anxiously tapped her notepad, watching Stanton lick his thin lips with sick pleasure. Time to take a calculated risk and reveal her full hand, she determined. You're right. My priorities are in order now, Katie said sharply. I know your murderous imposter is the only threat that matters. And I now know who she is targeting next. Stanton's wandering gaze snapped back to Katie, his toying smile fading slightly. Katie pressed on, emboldened. Melanie Wells, who died by Lake Berryessa, wasn't some random victim. She was adopted years ago. And her biological aunt has spent over a decade searching for Melanie after losing touch. Katie locked eyes with Stanton. An aunt who herself was stalked by a notorious serial killer as a college girl up in Oregon. An experience that nearly destroyed her before your capture gave her closure. She came here to California desperate for family, only to suffer more tragedy linked to murder. Stanton had gone stock still, all theatrical pretenses dropped. Katie knew she had connected dots no random copycat could access. She hastily gathered her files, pulse racing. Your avenging successor mentioned family ties to your crimes. This grieving aunt searching for her lost niece seems an obvious target, don't you think? Katie hurried towards the guard waiting to escort her out while Stanton stared silently. Pausing, she met his now cold, reptilian gaze one last time. The killer you apparently warned me about seems to live for trauma and grudges tied to you specifically. I clearly should start there. Let's see if I can't tempt her out of the shadows by dangling fresh bait. Katie strode out rapidly past cement walls covered in desperate scratchings of the damned. She prayed her risky gambit to expose this merciless impersonator wouldn't only further immerse her in the bloody legacy Stanton himself had authored. Chapter 8. Katie sat across from retired police captain Arnold Pike in a cramped booth at AL's diner picking at lukewarm fries. She had reached out to Pike immediately after leaving San Quentin, recalling his decorated history leading the violent crimes task force that had finally captured Stanton 5 years prior. Pike stabbed at rubbery eggs, grumbling about failing health as he filled Katie in on sinister secrets behind Stanton's decade of slaughter. Stanton was cunning, no doubt. But his tricks didn't fool us forever, and he knew the walls were closing in those final months, Pike recalled between bites. He got erratic near the end. Sloppy while trying to make up for lost time. Katie leaned forward intently. And he never let on about some partner helping extend his crazed spree. Pike frowned, pausing mid-chew. Partner? No way. Stanton was too proud claiming solo credit for every mutilation. Wouldn't have let anyone else steal his deranged thunder. Pike shrugged. Honestly, we figured it was pure luck we caught him before additional innocent lives got snuffed out. Katie tapped the table edge absently considering this. She remembered Stanton's smug bloviating during his trial about eluding capture so long. Wait. Katie said slowly. What did you mean you caught Stanton finally? He never resisted arrest or tried to flee, right? Just surrendered outside his victim's home, if I recall. Pike raised a bushy eyebrow quizzically. Surrendered? Who fed you that fairy tale? Pike wheezed before a coughing fit overtook him. Katie slid him a glass of water, looking baffled. Finally, Pike recovered enough to continue. Stanton escaped that night through backcountry for over 36 hellish hours. Was convinced he'd never see trial after the manhunt came up empty. Katie struggled to reconcile this bombshell admission with established records painting Stanton as an animal who knew his days outside a cell were over and waited obediently for police after one last kill. I don't understand. Katie murmured. Where did he flee then, and how was he found if the manhunt failed? Pike wiped his mouth roughly. Cabin tucked far back in the woods about 10 miles out. Abandoned place long rumored to harbor ghosts. We had nothing linking it to Stanton until... Pike paused and leaned closer across the table, his voice lowered. Until I got an anonymous message saying Stanton himself wanted to negotiate terms for his surrender face-to-face at that cabin location within the hour. Katie's brow furrowed as she digested this. You obviously complied rather than storming the place which you viewed clearly as a trap. Katie reasoned. So what really made Stanton quietly give up? Pike leaned back casually again. Now that's the real mystery, isn't it? I figured he just came unglued knowing his fun ended. But when I got there, he came out almost polite, like with hands up, said his work taking credit for all those unsolved cases was done. Real odd bird. Katie's pulse quickened, contemplating what dark forces she now knew had clearly been staging Stanton's capture while allowing his carnage to carry on. She opened the slim case file she brought, removing a photo of Stanton's 17th victim, Alice. And this final victim found right after Stanton's arrest. Katie said tightly. Surely proof he'd been busy that final night. Pike's face pinched, studying the photo sadly. No question on the timing. But we could never tie Alice direct to Stanton before he got pulled in. Her remains were just too damaged to confirm his signature. Pike shoved another forkful of eggs in solemnly. Katie peered closer at Alice's angelic face, understanding dawning. His legacy, it's her, Katie whispered. The murdered niece by the lake recently. Her death didn't copy Stanton's ritual, it literally resumed it through a surrogate. Katie stood abruptly, tossing cash down. I have to notify potential victims before she strikes again. Katie raced out the diner, ignoring Pike calling after her. Driving off, Katie grasped she had the final piece now. The grieving aunt who sought her out pleading innocence for Stanton was actually his vengeful torchbearer. Katie always unwittingly narrated the grisly tale while a woke sociopath orchestrated the next awful chapter. With her bait now set, Katie prepared to confront the source material for this tragedy herself. Chapter 9. Katie's rental car crept along the narrow mountain pass, tires spraying loose gravel into the ravine looming yards away. She'd left the winding asphalt roads over an hour back, relying now on the GPS tracker in her phone leading her deeper into unstable terrain. Katie did not consider herself remotely outdoorsy. Yet here she plunged determinedly onward into the Sierra backcountry, nearing the sinister rendezvous she had deliberately arranged. In 200 yards, take a sharp right. The clinical GPS voice echoed through the car's speakers. Katie slowed, squinting against the fading light. An even narrower trail snaked steeply upward to her right just ahead. Letting the car roll ahead slightly to scout, Katie gasped sharply at what awaited around the blind curve, a battered tin mailbox jutting from a post labeled 14. Obscured just behind it sat a crooked, abandoned cabin, her final destination. You have arrived, you have arrived. Repeated the GPS robotically. Katie inched ahead warily towards the mailbox. Just beyond, the cabin beckoned silently with missing roof planks allowing grim shadow to seep out. Katie cut the engine but left her headlights spilling ahead, illuminating the front porch in harsh fluorescent light. Steeling herself with a few quick breaths, she stepped from the car. The creak of ancient suspended floorboards groaning under her weight resounded as Katie mounted the first moaning step. Reaching the decaying front door, Katie raised a shaking fist to knock briskly. No response ever seemed likely this deep in the remote Alaska wilderness she had journeyed to, seeking the origins of a ghost who haunted her relentlessly all the way back in California. Still Katie knocked again, louder. Finally a hoarse voice rasped out from the shadows within, "Get on in here already, won't ya? Doors busted anyways." Katie tentatively pressed inward, the swollen wooden frame scraping loudly over warped floor planks. As the interior gloom slowly resolved before Katie's adjusting eyes, a hunched figure awaited by a sputtering oil lamp on a large oak desk. White hair hung in tangled curtains obscuring most of the woman's face. But Katie immediately recognized the familiar, weathered features from old case files. Cheryl Stark. Katie said almost inaudibly. Recognition flickered across the woman's sagging face. "Please, call me Slasher Cheryl. These days everyone does," she replied. A slight angle of her ragged mouth implied a smile. Katie couldn't suppress a shiver recalling the moniker tabloids had bestowed upon Cheryl over 4 decades back during a hellish period of psychological torment. Katie cleared her throat anxiously. "Right, Slasher Cheryl then. You clearly already know who I am and why I've come seeking you out all the way in remote Alaska." Katie let her sentence hang unfinished. She had baited this meeting with a vulnerable, dangling lure, herself. Cheryl grunted indifferently, rummaging her desk before extracting a near-empty bourbon bottle. "City girl like you, I figured you came about one thing only," she muttered before taking a ragged swig. That damned red devil down in the lower 48 leave me be for near half my days now, but his wicked echoes followed you straight here it sounds. Katie cautiously lowered herself into a rickety oak chair facing Cheryl over the scarred desk. She chose her next words delicately. Yes, well, Paul Stanton still seems to haunt us both despite that monster rotting forever behind bars. And I know the echoes you describe all too well. An avenging spirit carries out his brutality now, seeking justice for loss tied to him, especially among family. Katie steadied her voice, holding Cheryl's dulled gaze. But I now know this Avenger's true face hidden behind the theater, even if clever impersonation blurs the lines. The bourbon bottle froze halfway to Cheryl's tattered lips. Her milky eyes narrowed sharply. You got a lot of nerve, lady, she growled. Dragging up my pain to mask your own. Ain't no act about my Melanie bein' gone. I carried the weight of her loss my whole damn life. Bourbon sloshed violently as Cheryl emphasized her point, seeming to rally strength from impacted rage. Katie nodded solemnly, laying her cards fully out at last. I completely understand. The injustice at losing your niece after tirelessly tracking her down cuts so deeply. But the true architect of all your loss breathes free air still today. Katie reached carefully into her jacket, pulling free a photo captured on prison security footage the week prior, the smiling demon himself locked away. She slid the image towards Cheryl slowly. We both want peace, I think. But not through the phantom you pretend carries his deadly legacy. A heavy beat passed before Cheryl calmly slid the incriminating photo back towards Katie untouched. When she finally raised her clouded eyes, no trace of suppressed fury remained. Instead, Cheryl's face suddenly broke into an eerie, familiar rictus grin that turned Katie's blood to ice instantly. You always were perceptive, Ms. Bell. Sharp as my favorite knife. Cheryl casually rose from behind the desk with alarming fluidity that belied her staggering age. Katie scrambled up frantically, backing away as an all-too-familiar cackle echoed throughout the decaying timbers enclosing them. She raised pleading eyes to the missing roof patches, desperately seeking heavenly salvation. But only gathering darkness peered down indifferently as this nightmarish realm sealed shut. Chapter 10. Katie's back collided roughly with the cabin wall, nowhere left to retreat from the stooped figure advancing slowly. Cheryl's gnarled hands flexed eagerly, her eyes black pools devoid of mercy. Katie forced herself to meet that ruthless gaze. Why carry on his slaughter after they caged the beast? Katie managed, buying precious seconds to plan escape from this inescapable trap she had unwittingly plunged them both towards. A raspy chuckle emanated from Cheryl's slackened face, morphing rapidly into Stanton's ghoulish mask before Katie's eyes. You already wheedled realities out of others that brought you this far, Katie girl, use that clever little mind. Not, Cheryl taunted. She raised a scolding finger. I laid breadcrumbs out especially for you. Katie's thoughts spun wildly as she inched sideways along the rough-hewn timbers. Stanton's longtime survivor Cheryl sought solace anonymously channeling her tormentor's persona. But what fused her fully with the demon's legacy? After your niece was killed, the call came making you an offer. Katie gasped out loud in dawning revelation. A call from someone claiming guardianship over all of Paul Stanton's unfinished business. Not. Cheryl halted her stalking, grinning wider in delight. Katie pressed on, frantically piecing together the reconstruction. That's how you inserted yourself into my investigation initially. You fed my agent intimacy about past victims only Stanton could know, lowering my guard for this grand performance. A thin tendril of drool leaked down Not Cheryl's chin, her eyes alight with gratification at Katie's deductions. Heart slamming against her ribs now, Katie swallowed back, bile rising in her throat as the last veil lifted. The faceless devil didn't just promise you freedom to kill again. Katie whispered. He guaranteed your own peaceful end afterwards finally too, didn't he? Not Cheryl froze, grinning silently, but the answer shone clearly in her demented gaze boring into Katie. She couldn't stifle a sharp laugh any longer. Oh, you are divine, Katie Bell. Worthy indeed. Not Cheryl shuddered in ecstasy, years of pain and oppression seeming to melt momentarily away. Katie eyed the nearest missing roof patch just barely out of reach, wondering if she could risk a leap through in time. But Not Cheryl rotated casually to block any escape route, relishing full control. He always spotlighted the worthy like you for our mutual delight. Not Cheryl mused. Understood why I needed closure. Her jagged nails clicked loudly as her hands flexed again. Katie pressed desperately back against the rough logs. The demon you struck a fatal bargain with won't ever grant rest, only more chaos, she pleaded. He lied about me being fate's offering to lure you into darkness. Not Cheryl paused thoughtfully, then shrugged. My choice was made long ago, girl, and I've lived with wicked whispers far too long. She lunged abruptly forward with alarming speed, then halted just shy of Katie's face. Fetid breath washed over Katie as Not Cheryl lovingly brushed back her hair like a doting parent. Katie saw only Stanton's lifeless eyes boring into her. She knew no more reasoning would reach the tortured vessel fused with his insatiable rage. She had gambled finding closure herself by deciphering the cold trail leading to this demonic incarnation. But she had sorely misjudged the clinging evil awaiting her here among the pines. As Not Cheryl's excited wheezing intensified, resignation and profound sorrow flooded Katie. She should have trusted old nightmares fade when brought fully into light, she realized too late. Instead, she resurrected the ghost more dangerous than the long-caged killer by offering herself up directly to ancient, patient darkness. Not Cheryl leaned in almost tenderly. I promise you'll see him soon yourself, girl. She crooned. We all cross over eventually, eh? Katie screamed with primal desperation, the sound quickly swallowed by shadows enveloping the cursed forest. Not Cheryl's pitiless joy would carry on eternally, she understood now. But the light's too brief flicker of Katie's story had finally been brutally snuffed out instead. Here is a potential additional ending chapter. Katie squeezed her eyes shut and braced for the inevitable agony as Not Cheryl bore down on her. But the expected piercing claws never came. After moments suspended in torment, Katie risked peeking through one eye. Not Cheryl remained frozen inches from Katie's face, gnarled hands hovering mid-air, her demonic grin faded. Katie glimpsed doubt and anguish creeping gradually back into Not Cheryl's clouded eyes as her humanity resurfaced briefly. Katie scarcely dared breathe, watching the internal struggle play out in Not Cheryl's quivering features. The righteous fury so long nurtured since Stanton's cruelty first shattered her world now warred with fading recollections of moral compass from simpler days. Katie licked her lips slowly, then whispered, You still have a choice, Cheryl. The wavering eyes before her blinked rapidly, recognition seeming to fully dawn at sound of her true name. Katie pressed on gently, You know this won't silence the voices or bring peace. A lone tear traced through the dirt, caking Not Cheryl's weathered cheeks. Her gnarled hands slowly lowered. Katie let out a shuddered breath of desperate relief. Without warning, Not Cheryl spun abruptly away towards the rear of the confined cabin. Katie froze again in dismay, certain she had failed to break through after all as Not Cheryl's hunched form receded from view. But mere moments later, Not Cheryl shuffled slowly back, clutching a faded framed photo to her chest like a life preserver. Halting before Katie once more, Not Cheryl extended a quivering hand and the photo. Katie accepted it warily. Two young girls with bouncing chestnut ponytails smiled wildly from some lost, untarnished moment. Not Cheryl tapped a cracked nail gently on the shorter girl's face. My Melissa. She whispered fondly, a lilting echo of maternal warmth momentarily smoothing her ragged tones. Katie studied the happy child's face, recognizing glimpses of the doomed woman she had come to be. She met not Cheryl's yearning eyes again. She's beautiful, Cheryl. And she'd want more for you beyond this misery. Not Cheryl scanned the weathered image again herself before giving a small, defeated nod as more tears traced muddy streaks down her leathery cheeks. Katie placed a tentative hand softly on Not Cheryl's slumped shoulder. We'll walk out into the light again together now. Through the trees awaiting us both, not the shadows. Not Cheryl lifted her gaze once more, seeking absolution from Katie. She drew a shuddered breath, then shuffled slowly around, embracing escape beyond the cursed walls at long last. The end.